For 41 years, he believed he was doing everything right. He stayed, he provided, he never walked away. He believed that consistency was love, that commitment was proven by endurance, and that time itself would hold everything together. From the outside, his marriage looked solid. Decades together, shared history, familiar routines, nothing broken, nothing dramatic, nothing that demanded immediate attention. And that's why he never questioned it. He didn't see the missed moments as losses. He didn't hear the silence as a warning. He didn't recognize waiting as something that slowly drains a person of themselves. He thought love was something that lasted simply because it began. He thought being there physically was the same as showing up emotionally. He thought tomorrow would always arrive with another chance to listen, to speak, to choose differently. But then, in the quiet of a hospital room, his wife said something he was never meant to forget, not in anger, not in blame, but with a calm honesty that stripped 41 years of assumptions down to the truth. In that moment, he realized something devastating. You don't lose everything all at once. You lose it slowly, when you postpone what matters, when you mistake habit for love, and when you assume time is on your side. He always believed love was something that lasted simply because it started. Once you chose it, once you committed, it stayed. That belief followed him for 41 years, quietly shaping how little attention he gave to the fragile parts of marriage. Their life together looked solid from the outside. A long marriage, shared history, familiar routines. People admired the longevity, mistaking time for depth. He never corrected them, because he believed it too. He was dependable in the ways that could be measured. He showed up to work, paid bills on time, fixed what broke. He took pride in being reliable, unaware that reliability can coexist with emotional absence. She was expressive when they were younger, curious, open. She spoke about feelings easily then, about dreams, about fears, about the kind of closeness she wanted. He listened politely but rarely engaged, assuming those conversations were phases that would pass. As years went on, she learned to edit herself. She shortened her thoughts, softened her needs, replaced honesty with practicality. He noticed the change but interpreted it as maturity, not loss. He believed marriage was about endurance, staying, pushing through, keeping things together no matter what. He didn't realize that endurance without intimacy slowly turns love into obligation. They spent evenings in the same rooms, living parallel lives. He watched television. She read or sat quietly. Silence became normal, comfortable even. He mistook comfort for connection. Whenever a sense of distance crossed his mind, he dismissed it. Long marriages change, he told himself. Passion fades. That's just life. Those thoughts allowed him to remain emotionally still. She began to speak less about herself and more about logistics, appointments, errands, schedules. It felt efficient. He liked efficiency. He didn't see that she was protecting herself from disappointment. He rarely asked her how she felt anymore, not because he didn't care, but because he assumed he already knew. Familiarity had replaced curiosity, and curiosity had quietly died. When disagreements arose, she resolved them quickly, almost too quickly. She stopped pushing her point, stopped insisting on being understood. He appreciated the lack of conflict without questioning its cost. He never considered how lonely it feels to stop being seen by the person who knows you best. Loneliness, he believed, only existed in absence, not in shared space. As the years stacked up, memory replaced intention. He relied on what they had been instead of investing in what they were becoming. History became his proof of love. When her health began to change, he stepped fully into action. Doctor visits, medication schedules, adjustments to the house. He was excellent at managing problems. It gave him purpose. She thanked him often, even when she was tired, even when she struggled to speak. Gratitude came easily to her. He took it as confirmation that he was doing things right. But there were moments when she looked at him with something unresolved in her eyes. Not anger, not sadness. Something quieter, something unfinished. He noticed it but never asked about it. He assumed there would be time later for deeper conversations. When things stabilized, when stress reduced, when life slowed, later had always worked before. As her strength faded, her voice softened, but her awareness sharpened. She became more intentional with her words, choosing silence over small talk. He interpreted this as exhaustion. He sat beside her often, physically present, emotionally guarded. He believed being there was enough. He didn't realize presence without vulnerability can feel empty. The air in the room changed long before he recognized it. Something unspoken gathered weight, a sense that time was narrowing. He felt it briefly, then pushed it aside. He still believed that if anything truly important needed to be said, there would be a clear moment for it, a moment that would announce itself. He didn't know that moments like that rarely do. The moment came without ceremony. No warning, no dramatic shift, just a stillness that felt heavier than the ones before it. He sat in the chair beside her bed, scrolling through thoughts rather than his phone, convinced this was just another quiet stretch of the day. She asked him to move closer. The request surprised him, not because it was unusual, but because of how deliberate it sounded. He leaned in, expecting a practical question, something about medication or discomfort. That's how their conversations had been shaped for years. She didn't speak right away. She looked at him carefully, as if studying a face she had known for decades, but was seeing clearly one last time. That pause unsettled him more than words would have. When she finally spoke, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She spoke with a calm that felt practiced, as though she had repeated these sentences silently many times before allowing them to leave her. She told him she was not afraid of dying. What troubled her was how much of her life she had lived waiting. Waiting to be asked, waiting to be chosen in moments that mattered, waiting to feel like more than a responsibility. He felt a reflex to respond, to defend, to explain. The old instincts rose quickly, but something in her expression told him not to interrupt. He stayed silent, uncertain, exposed. She said there were years when she convinced herself that love meant patience, that if she gave enough space, enough understanding, closeness would return on its own. Over time, that patience had cost her her voice. She spoke about moments he wouldn't remember. Small moments. Evenings she hoped he would notice her quiet. Mornings she wanted him to linger. Choices he never knew he was making. Each sentence landed carefully, not to wound him, but to finally be heard. There was no accusation in her tone, only clarity. That clarity hurt more than anger ever could. He realized he had spent decades believing love was proven by staying, by not leaving, by not failing. He had never understood that love is also proven by engagement, by risk, by attention. She told him she didn't regret marrying him. That surprised him. What she regretted was how much of herself she had slowly folded away to keep peace intact. His chest tightened, not with panic, but with recognition. A truth he had avoided now stood plainly between them. He wanted to deny it, but denial no longer felt possible. She said she hoped he would live differently with the time he had left, that he would stop confusing silence with harmony and routine with intimacy, that he would notice people before time forced him to. He finally tried to speak, but the words came out tangled, insufficient. Apologies felt too small. Explanations felt pointless. The past refused to be reorganized into something gentler. She placed her hand over his, steady and light. The gesture wasn't forgiveness, it was release. She wasn't asking him to fix anything now. She was letting go of what could no longer be changed. He felt the weight of 41 years compress into that moment. Every postponed conversation, every assumption, every quiet dismissal returned with sharp clarity. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about what needed to be done next. There was nothing to plan, nothing to manage, only the present, heavy and undeniable. She closed her eyes briefly, as if resting. He watched her breathe, aware that the air itself felt fragile. The room seemed to narrow around them, time folding inward. He understood then that her words weren't meant to haunt him. They were meant to wake him, not as punishment, but as truth finally spoken. And as he sat there, holding her hand, he knew that whatever came after this moment would carry the weight of what he now understood, whether he was ready for it or not. He remained still, afraid that any movement might break the fragile clarity that had settled between them. The room felt suspended, as if time itself had slowed to listen. He had spent most of his life rushing through moments like this without knowing it. He watched her face soften as she rested, and for the first time in decades, he studied her without distraction. Not as his wife in a role, not as someone who needed care, but as a person who had lived a full inner life beside him, largely unseen. Memories surfaced uninvited, not the milestones people talk about, but the ordinary days he barely remembered. Breakfasts eaten in silence, evenings lost to routine, moments when she had looked at him, waiting, while he had already moved on mentally. He realized how often he had mistaken familiarity for understanding. He thought knowing her habits meant knowing her heart. He had never noticed how much she had changed herself to fit the space he allowed. The house had always felt functional to him. Now it felt like a record of absences. Chairs she sat in alone, rooms where conversations never happened, spaces filled more with habit than warmth. He felt a deep discomfort rise in him, not panic, but exposure, the kind that comes when there is nothing left to hide behind. No work, no responsibility, no logic to soften what was finally clear. He thought about how often he had avoided emotional conversations by telling himself they weren't necessary. He had believed silence kept things stable. Now he saw that silence had slowly rewritten their marriage without his consent. She stirred slightly, and his attention snapped back to the present. He leaned closer, not because she asked, but because he finally understood the value of closeness while it was still possible. He wanted to ask her questions, so many questions, but he sensed that this was no longer the time to extract answers. This moment was not about gathering information. It was about witnessing what already existed. He noticed how calm she seemed after speaking, as if saying those words had settled something inside her that had been restless for years. The contrast between her peace and his unrest felt almost cruel. He wondered how long she had carried those thoughts alone. How many times she had decided it wasn't worth the effort to speak. How many opportunities he had unknowingly closed by being unavailable. For the first time, he questioned the story he had told himself about being a good partner. He saw how easily good intentions can coexist with deep neglect, and how rarely neglect announces itself clearly. Time felt heavier now. Each minute carried meaning instead of urgency. He wasn't thinking about tomorrow or next week. He was thinking about now, and how unfamiliar it felt to stay fully inside it. He noticed his own breathing, shallow and uneven. Emotion pressed against him, unfamiliar and unpracticed. He had spent years managing feelings instead of allowing them. He thought about all the times he assumed love was understood and therefore didn't need to be expressed. He saw now that understanding fades when it isn't reinforced, no matter how long the history. The room remained quiet, but it was no longer empty. It was filled with everything that had been unsaid and finally acknowledged. That awareness changed the texture of the silence. He stayed beside her, not reaching for distraction, not escaping into thought. Presence, he realized, was not something you promise for later. It is something you practice when it costs you comfort. He didn't know what the coming hours would bring. He didn't try to imagine them. For once, he allowed uncertainty to exist without control, without explanation. And as he sat there, fully awake to the weight of his own awareness, he understood that this moment was reshaping him, quietly, permanently, even though nothing outward had changed yet. He stayed with her through the long stretch of quiet that followed, resisting the old urge to fill space with words or movement. For the first time, he understood that stillness wasn't something to escape. It was something to honor. The light in the room shifted slowly, shadows lengthening across the walls. He noticed details he had overlooked for years: the rhythm of her breathing, the subtle tension in her brow, the way her hand rested when she was calm. These small observations felt intimate in a way that surprised him. He thought about how rarely he had paid attention to details unless they demanded action. Problems had always drawn his focus. People had waited. Now, with nothing to fix, attention became the only thing he could give. He realized how much of his life had been spent preparing for moments that never arrived, conversations postponed, emotions deferred, affection assumed. He had treated time like a resource that would always replenish itself. She opened her eyes briefly and looked at him again, not searching this time, just acknowledging. The look felt like a quiet agreement between them. Nothing more needed to be said right now. He felt the urge to apologize again, to say something meaningful, but he stopped himself. Words, he finally understood, can be a way of avoiding presence. He stayed silent, choosing awareness over reassurance. His thoughts drifted to the early years of their marriage, not with nostalgia, but with curiosity. He wondered when exactly he had stopped asking questions, when listening had turned into assumption. There was no single answer, only accumulation. He noticed how often he had equated love with endurance, how he had praised himself for staying, for not leaving, for holding things together. He saw now that holding something together is not the same as holding someone close. The quiet continued, but it no longer felt empty. It felt dense, layered with memory and meaning. He sensed that something irreversible had already occurred, not an ending, but a shift in understanding that could not be undone. He reflected on how rarely people are taught to recognize emotional erosion, how easily it hides behind routine and responsibility. He wondered how many lives unfold this way, quietly missing themselves. He became aware of his own discomfort with vulnerability, how quickly he used to retreat into logic when emotions surfaced, how often he chose certainty over connection because it felt safer. She adjusted slightly, and he responded immediately, not out of duty, but attentiveness. The change felt subtle but profound. This was the kind of responsiveness she had needed long before now. He considered how much courage it must have taken for her to speak honestly after so many years of restraint. He felt humbled by that courage and unsettled by how long it had gone unseen. The room seemed to breathe with them. Time no longer felt like something rushing past, but something pausing, allowing space for recognition. He wondered why it had taken loss for him to finally arrive. He thought about the word wasted, how harsh it sounded, how final, and yet he couldn't deny the truth beneath it. Not wasted in anger or chaos, but in quiet neglect that felt harmless at the time. He felt a growing awareness that whatever remained ahead would be lived differently, not because he promised it, but because he could no longer unsee what he now understood. He stayed close, attentive to each small change, each moment offered. Presence no longer felt optional or theoretical. It felt necessary, urgent, real. He didn't know what the next hours would bring, and for once he didn't try to prepare for them. Preparation had cost him enough already. All he knew was that this awareness, this late, painful clarity, had settled into him fully, and it would shape every moment that followed, whether he was ready for that responsibility or not.